My name is Tessa, and I'm 15 now. Looking back at everything that happened, it's hard to believe how much my life has changed in just 2 years. I think that's what happens when your world turns upside down twice, leaving you in chaos where the past seems like a shadow and the future is a frightening unknown. It all started when I was 13. Back then, I still believed that family was something unshakable, that mom and dad, even if they argued or sometimes drifted apart, would still stay together, because that's how it should be. But one day everything changed, not gradually, as happens with ordinary problems, but abruptly, like a thunderclap from a clear sky. My parents divorced, and the house I grew up in was left to my mother. I stayed with her too, because it was easier that way, it was more familiar, and no one even thought to ask me what I wanted. Dad agreed to pay large alimony payments, and one day I accidentally overheard my mother, holding back a satisfied smile, telling a friend about it on the phone, assuring her that she finally got what she deserved. These words stuck in my head like a splinter that couldn't be pulled out, and every day I felt more and more that I didn't understand what was going on and who was right. Why did you and Dad break up? I asked my mom over and over again in the first months after the divorce, hoping to get an answer that would ease my pain a little. But Mom always shook her head, sighed, and said in the same cold, almost indifferent voice, "Your father made his choice, Tessa. He doesn't want to be a part of our lives anymore. He doesn't want to see you. It's better if you just accept it." How can you accept something that doesn't make sense? How can you accept that a man who called you his little star, who spent evenings with you at textbooks and explained difficult things so that you began to understand them, suddenly just stopped wanting to be your father? It hurt so much that sometimes I felt like I couldn't breathe. And then the letters started coming. Every holiday, whether it was Christmas, a birthday, or even a regular high school graduation, an anonymous message appeared in the mailbox. There was nothing special about it, simple words of love and support, written in a smooth handwriting that seemed vaguely familiar to me. "Keep reaching for the stars, darling." I reread these words dozens of times, frozen by a strange feeling, as if there was something important hidden between the lines, something that I knew but was afraid to admit. It was him. Who else could have written such a thing? These words are exactly what Dad used to tell me before going to bed when I was little. I never told my mom about these letters. I just knew I couldn't. It was enough to see how her face changed at the mere mention of her father's name, her lips pressed into a thin line, and her eyes turned cold, as if she were swallowing something bitter. After the divorce, Mom quit her job, saying she needed time to recover. But I wasn't a naive girl who was easily fooled. My father's alimony was more than enough for my mother to afford to do whatever she wanted. She started redoing the house. First she repainted the walls in warm beige shades, then she changed the furniture, and then she got carried away with yoga classes, assuring me that it helps her find herself. And then Mark appeared. Mom said she met him in one of her classes, but in fact he appeared in our lives as suddenly as my father disappeared. One day over dinner, she announced that she was in a serious relationship and that our house would soon become a little more complete. It took me a moment to understand what she meant. But soon everything fell into place. Mark moved in with his 2 children, 13-year-old Tommy and 11-year-old Sarah. At that moment, I still did not realize how much my life would change. Mom, who had always been restrained and strict, suddenly turned into a woman full of care and attention, but not to me. She surrounded Tommy and Sarah with a warmth that I had never received from her. She helped Sarah braid her hair, cooked Tommy his favorite dishes, laughed with them and did everything possible to make them feel at home in this house. And I felt like a ghost. I sat at the kitchen table, listened to them discussing their business, laughing at something I didn't understand, and realized that the place that once belonged to me was now occupied. "Mom," I said one day when I couldn't hold back anymore, "it seems to me that you've forgotten that I exist." She looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on her before. There was something strange there, a mixture of pity and annoyance, as if I was talking about something insignificant, not worth attention. "Don't be selfish, Tessa," she replied, casting a quick glance in the direction of Tommy and Sarah, who were laughing at something of their own at that moment. They lost their mother when they were babies. They need special attention and care. You have to understand that you are already old enough. I wanted to say something, but the words stuck in my throat. Old enough for what? In order to deal with your own feelings? In order to silently watch as the place in my mother's life that used to belong to me is now occupied by others? I turned away, gripping the edge of the table with my fingers, and at that moment I realized that everything had really changed. Mom became obsessed with the idea of taking family photos every weekend, as if our lives were not reality, but an elaborate production for her social media, where she played the main role of a caring mother in an ideal family. She dressed us as if we were going to a fashion show, choosing outfits down to the smallest detail, thinking over the color scheme so that everything looked harmonious, and if there were no suitable clothes in my closet, I just had to be content with what I had, while Tommy and Sarah happily tried on new things that Mom bought. Especially for these photo shoots. She positioned us in front of her phone's camera, selected camera angles, gave instructions, adjusted poses, and honed every detail until she achieved the perfect result, which, in her opinion, was supposed to prove to the whole world that our family was happy. Tessa, stand behind Tommy, don't move to the left, try to smile more naturally, she said, squinting slightly, assessing how the light was falling, and adjusting Sarah's strands of hair so that they looked neater in the picture. A click, another, then another, an endless series of poses, permutations, corrections, until Mom got exactly what she wanted. These shots could last for hours, until a satisfied expression appeared on her face, which indicated that another, perfect, photo would add to her social media feed. The worst part wasn't even the posing itself, but the moment when Mom started bragging about the results at every family meeting, enthusiastically showing photos to Aunt Karen, Uncle Pete, and other relatives, who nodded admiringly and repeated the same thing. Look at what beautiful pictures. You look like a real family. You'll never guess that they're not siblings. I stood next to him, feeling like a prop in my mother's carefully constructed play, when my role was to compliment the picture, but not to be important in it. No one saw the reality behind these photos, the way Sarah rolled her eyes when I walked into the room, or how Tommy pretended that I just didn't exist. But that wasn't even the hardest part for me. I was torn away from Grandma Rose. After the divorce, she made it clear that while I was living with my mom, I wasn't allowed to visit her. I couldn't even call her without fear that Mom would hear and get angry. And I missed my grandmother's warm embrace, her cozy home soaked in the scent of fresh pastries, and the way she listened to me, really listened, without pretending, without looking up at the phone or looking past, as my mother did. I still remembered the warmth of her kitchen, the smell of vanilla cookies that we made together, and the quiet laughter that filled the space, making it truly familiar. But now I have nothing left but those memories. Instead, I found myself among my mother's family, who unconditionally believed in her version of the story, accepting Tommy and Sarah as part of us without a shadow of a doubt, admiring how my mother wonderfully copes with the role of a stepmother. "You're doing great, Linda," they said, looking at her with smiles. "Tommy and Sarah must be so happy to have you now." I was silent, sitting in the corner, watching this performance from the sidelines, and wondering if I had become invisible. As the months passed, the distance between my mother and me grew. She lived and breathed her new family, planning everything around Tommy and Sarah's schedules and desires. "Tommy, what would you like to watch tonight?" "What is it?" she asked when we were having a family movie. "Sarah, honey, where should we go for lunch this weekend?" My opinion didn't matter anymore. I sat there during family discussions, watching my mom eagerly lean in to hear what Sarah had to say, or as she enthusiastically planned a trip to the restaurant Tommy had chosen. Sometimes I opened my mouth to suggest something, but as soon as I spoke, my mom would get up, grab her keys, and announce with a smile that they were going to watch a new superhero movie or try ice cream at a trendy cafe on the other side of town. One Sunday, when they were going for a family outing again, I stayed in my room. No one came to me, asked why I wasn't going with them, or tried to convince me to join. I was lying on the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds coming from behind the door, laughter, the slamming of shoes on the floor, the ringing animation in my mother's voice. And suddenly I heard Sarah's voice. "Well, now we don't have to pretend to turn it on, Mom." There was silence. Summer came with an announcement that would have thrilled me when I was a kid, but now I knew that everything my mom considered amazing news often meant something that didn't concern me or that was changing without my involvement. Mom and Mark gathered us in the living room, their faces glowing with anticipation. They were practically trembling with impatience to share their joy, as if they were announcing some grand event. "We have amazing news," Mom said, squeezing Mark's hand and smiling so broadly that it looked almost artificial. "We are planning a month-long trip to Europe." I didn't even have time to process what I had heard, as Tommy and Sarah burst into joyful cries, jumping up and down like little children who had just been given a puppy. "Can I go to Paris?" Sarah screamed, clapping her hands. "I dream of seeing the Eiffel Tower." "And Barcelona?" Tommy chimed in, clearly as excited as his sister. "They have the best football stadium in the world there. I have to get there." They were jumping, laughing, shouting out the names of cities, discussing what they wanted to see, interrupting each other, and I was just sitting on the couch, looking at this scene, like a spectator who happened to be in the audience. No one turned to me, asked me what I thought, if I wanted to spend a month in Europe, if I had any desires or dreams. They had already decided everything for me, and my opinion didn't matter. The morning came, the day of departure. I was sitting in my room, double-checking the list of things I was going to take with me, when I heard a slight rustle behind me. When I looked up, I saw Sarah standing by my dresser. She was holding my favorite blue swimsuit in one hand and a pair of scissors in the other. She slowly, methodically cut the cloth, and a slight smile slid across her lips. For a moment, I froze, as if my brain refused to accept what I saw. I knew that Sarah didn't love me. I knew that she treated me with contempt, that she didn't like my presence in her ideal family, but this. It was different. It was cruel. "Give me that." I lunged forward, trying to grab the scissors from her hands. Sarah jerked, clutching them even tighter, and suddenly we were fighting. She was smaller than me, but surprisingly strong. Her nails dug into my arm as she abruptly yanked the swimsuit to the side, and then, quite unexpectedly, she began to scream at the top of her voice. "Help me. Tessa is attacking me." It took me a moment to realize what had happened, but I immediately heard footsteps on the stairs. The door burst open, and Mom and Mark burst into the room. They found us both flushed and disheveled, and the torn swimsuit was lying on the floor between us. She was trying to hurt me. Sarah screamed, rushing to Mark, cowering by his side like a frightened child. I was just standing here, and she went crazy. "It's not true," I exclaimed, feeling despair boiling up inside me. "She cut my swimsuit." I tried to stop her. Mom took a cursory glance at the ruined fabric on the floor, then turned her eyes to me, and I saw in them not doubt, not an attempt to figure it out, but only irritation and cold condemnation. "What's wrong with you, Tessa?" Her voice was icy. "Are you really so jealous of Sarah that you're attacking her?" "Go to your room and stay there until we leave for the airport," Mom interrupted me sharply, pursing her lips. "Obviously, you can't be trusted when it comes to Sarah." I froze, watching as she, without even trying to find out the truth, sided with Sarah. They left, taking her with them, and through my closed door I could hear Mom's comforting words. "Don't worry, honey, we're going to the mall now and buy you new clothes to make you feel better after this terrible experience." I sat on the bed, staring at the pieces of my ruined swimsuit, listening to them go shopping. No one bothered to ask if I needed a new swimsuit. No one asked how I was feeling. No one even gave me a chance to justify myself. Evening came. We all gathered in the lobby with our luggage, ready to leave. Mom was checking the list of things one last time, and Mark was loading suitcases into a taxi. Sarah and Tommy were standing next to each other, excitedly discussing the upcoming trip, and only I kept to myself, clutching the handle of my suitcase in my hands. Mom suddenly stopped in front of me, giving me a cold look. "I still don't think you deserve this trip after what you did to Sarah," she said, and there was no doubt in her voice. "But we can't leave you alone at home for a month, so you'll have to come with us. Just try not to cause any more problems at the airport." She turned away without waiting for my reply and strode towards the exit, putting her arm around Sarah's shoulders. I watched her go, feeling something inside me slowly but surely crumble. I was sitting in a small, cold airport office, clutching the edges of the blanket that had been carefully covered over me, but it couldn't protect me from the cold that had crept inside me. The gray walls, the stern faces of the staff, the muffled conversations on the phone, all this merged into a hum, distant and muffled, as if it were happening not to me, but to someone else, some unfortunate child who was forgotten at the airport, but definitely not to me, not to Tessa. The policeman sitting across from him was writing something down in a notebook. His eyebrows were furrowed, his lips were compressed into a thin line, and then he looked up from his notes and asked softly, "Do you remember your father's phone number? Or maybe you have his address?" I swallowed, feeling a tight lump form in my throat that was impossible to swallow or exhale. My voice faltered, and I forced myself to take a deep breath. "I haven't seen him in 2 years. But I know his name, I know where he worked, earlier." "That's something," the policeman nodded encouragingly, making notes. "We'll try to find him." He got up, said something quietly to the female officer, who nodded and left the room, and I remained sitting, looking down at the floor, examining the scuffs on my own sneakers. Time passed slowly, too slowly, and every stroke of the second hand on the clock behind the policeman felt like a hammer blow. Thoughts were spinning in my head, one worse than the other. How could they leave me? Shouldn't Mom have at least checked to see if I was around? Couldn't Mark have at least looked back when they walked into the security area? Couldn't Sarah have said something? Any word? Or did they just decide it was for the best? I cowered, hiding my face in my hands. They wanted to leave me. They really wanted it. The door opened again, and the same female officer entered. A certain look of relief appeared on her face, but the shadow of anxiety did not go away either. "We've contacted your father," she said, squatting down in front of me so that our eyes were on the same level. "He's confirmed that you're his daughter, and he's on his way here." I jerked my head up in disbelief. "Is he coming?" My voice sounded so weak that I barely heard myself. "Yes, honey, he's on his way." I didn't know how to feel. Joy? Relief? Fear? I hadn't seen him in 2 years, hadn't spoken to him, didn't know what he was like now, if he'd changed, if he'd want to see me. He could have refused. He could have said he didn't need it. He could tell that I was no longer his problem. But he's coming. "Thank you," was all I could manage, feeling my eyes fill with tears again, but they weren't the same tears anymore. The next few hours passed in a kind of fog. I was sitting in an armchair, drinking hot chocolate, which one of the employees brought me, answering questions about my mother, about our family, about how long I had noticed that they treated me like this. I was talking, but it was as if I were hearing myself from the outside, as if I were talking not about my own life, but about someone else's, about some girl who was unlucky enough to be born in the wrong place and at the wrong time. But everything changed when footsteps were heard in the hallway. I looked up and saw him. Father. He hadn't changed much, except that the wrinkles around his eyes had deepened, and his hair was a little grayer, but he was the same. The ones I remembered. The one I used to wait for until I stopped. He met my gaze, and something in his eyes twitched. And then he took a step towards me, hugged me tightly, so tightly, as if he was afraid that if he opened his hands, I would disappear. "Tessa," he whispered, and I felt his voice tremble. I closed my eyes and snuggled up to him, listening to the hum of the airport fade away, the voices of the police fade away, and time freezes. I wasn't alone anymore. I sat with my back pressed against the hard back of the chair, feeling the cold lump inside me grow, penetrating into all corners of my body, and it seemed that even the hot aroma of coffee filling the kitchen could not warm me. Everything inside was squeezed so hard that it became difficult to breathe. It was difficult even to look at my father, who was sitting across from me, clutching a mug as if it was the only thing holding him in this reality. You. My voice faltered, and I had to swallow to keep the tears from suddenly welling up in my eyes. You mean Mom? Did she make you leave? Did she threaten you? My father nodded slowly, and at that moment I saw something in his eyes that I had never noticed before, not just pain, not just bitterness, but fatigue, deep in his bones, the fatigue of a man who has lived in fear for too long, carried a secret for too long. For too long he was silent. She knew that I would never give up on you, Tessa. His voice was quiet, but there was iron confidence in it, and I believed him immediately, unconditionally, because I knew it was true. She knew that if I had fought for you, I would have stopped at nothing, and that's why she did everything so that I would have no choice. I slowly shook my head, trying to make sense of what I had heard, but everything was confused in my head, as if my thoughts had been turned upside down. But why? I finally managed, feeling my voice break, because I couldn't understand, couldn't believe that Mom could be so cruel. Why was it so important to her that you leave? Why would she want me to think that you just left us? My father ran his hand over his face, as if trying to wipe off something sticky and heavy that had been hanging on him for years, and then he looked at me again, and there was bitterness mixed with some dark knowledge in his eyes. Because Mark didn't want to be just a stepfather, his voice was quiet, but every word stuck into me like thin ice needles. He wanted to be the only father in this house. The world in front of me reeled, and I gasped for breath, feeling everything inside me turn over. What? I almost whispered, because I didn't have the strength to speak louder. He said that there should be no outsiders in the family, my father continued, looking away, and I realized that this topic was just as difficult for him as it was for me. He didn't want me around, he didn't want you to have anyone but him. And your mother agreed. They decided that it would be easier for you if you forgot me, if you decided that I just left and didn't want to be a part of your life. I felt something wild, hot, and irreconcilable boiling up inside me, anger, resentment, fear, everything mixed into one seething lump that could not be swallowed, could not be thrown away, could not be ignored. They are. His voice was shaking, and his hands were clenched into fists. They took you away from me. They took my father away from me. My father nodded slowly, his fingers gripped the cup even tighter, but he didn't say anything, and it suddenly became clear to me that he hadn't just lived with this pain all these years. He had endured it, carried it with him because he couldn't change anything, because every night he fell asleep thinking about me and he woke up every morning knowing that he didn't even have the right to write to me. I didn't want you to grow up thinking that I had abandoned you, he finally said, his voice full of the same weariness that permeated his gaze. But I couldn't risk it. If I had gone against them, if I hadn't obeyed, would have lost any chance of seeing you again. I closed my eyes, feeling the lump in my throat getting heavier. And you're just agreed? My words were harsh, too harsh, but I couldn't hold them back, couldn't handle what I was feeling at that moment. The father abruptly raised his head, his eyes flashed with pain, but he was not angry, he understood. What was I supposed to do? His voice was hoarse, broken. Your mother kept me on a short leash, and if I had moved, if I had taken a single step wrong, she would have destroyed me. I looked at him, studied every wrinkle, every hint of pain in his eyes, and suddenly realized he wasn't lying. He's telling the truth. The whole truth. I'm not going to lose you anymore, Tessa, he added after a pause, and there was steel in his voice. Never. I felt something new rising up inside me, something I hadn't felt in a very long time, hope. Lisa, who had been quietly cooking in the kitchen all this time, suddenly turned around and, coming up to me, covered my hand with her warm palm. "You'll never be alone again, honey," she said softly, with genuine concern in her voice. "You're home." I looked at my father, then at her, then back at my father, and at some point I allowed myself to believe that maybe all was really not lost. Maybe I still have a family. A real family. But the more time passed, the clearer it became that I could wait forever. They weren't going to come back for me, weren't even going to pretend to be worried, weren't going to do anything that even resembled caring. At first, I tried to justify their silence. Maybe they were too busy, maybe they decided that I was already an adult and could handle it on my own, maybe. But the truth couldn't be ignored for too long. They just cut me out of their lives, as easily as they delete an unnecessary photo from a gallery, block an annoying stranger on social media, lock an old, unnecessary suitcase in the basement and forget about its existence. I looked at the photos of their serene lives, tan faces, flawless smiles, perfectly matched outfits, and an icy emptiness grew inside me. They're happy. Without me. They don't remember, they don't get bored, they don't search, they don't worry. I thought it would break my heart, that I would fall into the darkness of despair, but to my surprise, I felt something completely different, anger. Deaf, cold, burning out all doubts. "They didn't even try to contact me," I said one evening, sitting on the veranda of Grandma Rose's house, when my father came out to me with 2 cups of hot tea. He silently handed me one, sat down next to me, lit a cigarette and looked thoughtfully into the darkness. "That says a lot about them," he replied softly, taking a deep drag. "It means they don't need me," I continued, clutching the mug in my hands, enjoying its warmth. My father hesitated, then nodded. "I think it is." I expected those words to hurt me, but instead I felt strangely relieved. Years of lies, hopes, expectations, all this finally crumbled to dust, leaving behind a clean, empty space that could be filled with something new. "Michael said we can apply for emancipation," the father continued. "It's not easy, but in your situation, considering that they left you stranded at the airport, it won't be difficult to prove their negligence." I looked up at him. "Emancipation?" "Yes, legal independence." He stubbed out his cigarette and turned to me. "You will no longer be tied to them, you will not depend on their decisions. You'll become independent." I thought about it. I've been trying to please my mother all my life, trying to meet her expectations, to be the daughter she could be proud of, but now that I have no illusions left, I realize that I've been going nowhere all this way. "I want to do this," I said firmly, feeling something click inside, as if the doors leading to the future had finally opened in front of me. The father exhaled slowly, a faint smile flickered across his face. "Then we'll do it." The process took several weeks. Michael turned out to be not only an excellent lawyer, but also a man who really wanted to help. He led the business with a confidence and determination that amazed me. I appeared in court several times, answered the judge's questions, signed documents, proved that I could provide for myself and make my own decisions. The day the court ruled in my favor, my father and Lisa took me out to celebrate. "You're officially free now," Michael said as we toasted each other in a small family diner. "Yeah, but you know what?" I smiled back at him, sincerely for the first time in a long time. "I've never felt so alone." Lisa squeezed my hand, my father smiled, and Grandma Rose sent me a voicemail crying with joy. And Mom never wrote. I have changed in a way I could not have imagined before, as if I had lived a lifetime full of realization, bitterness, but also liberation, which finally allowed me to breathe deeply, without fear of being rejected, without waiting for a stab in the back. My father and I moved into a small but cozy house in a quiet neighborhood, where the morning light fell softly on the wooden floors, where the air smelled of freshly brewed coffee, and the windows overlooked the garden, which Lisa promised to help me green in the spring. Grandma Rose often visited us, bringing her signature apple and cinnamon pies, and every time she entered the house, she touched my cheek, as if she couldn't believe that I was really here, safe. I returned to school, and although at first I felt like a stranger, as if I had suddenly found myself in a life that should belong to someone else, gradually everything began to fall into place. When the teachers found out about my situation, they treated me with understanding. Classmates at first looked askance, obviously discussing what had happened behind my back, but then the interest subsided, and I became just Tessa again, not the girl who was abandoned at the airport, not the heroine of a scandalous story, but an ordinary teenager with his whole life ahead of him. However, the strangest thing was that Mom disappeared. No, she didn't literally disappear. I saw her close her social media accounts, delete photos, rumor has it, sell the house, but she never tried to contact me. Not a call, not a letter, not even a pathetic message in which she would write, "I'm sorry." And that was the hardest part. Not her betrayal, I've already come to terms with that. Not the trial, not the shame of being abandoned, not even the need to build a new life from scratch. And here is this silence, this absolute emptiness where there used to be at least a shadow of connection. Are you waiting for her to write? My father asked me once, when he caught me aimlessly flipping through my phone, staring at the screen, as if hoping to see something important there. I shook my head, but I lied. Sometimes people leave like they've never been in your life, he continued, taking a sip of coffee. It's hard, but at some point you realize that they have never been the family you would like. I looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time in a long time, not only as a father, but also as someone who had gone through the same pain. Have you been waiting? I asked after a pause. He chuckled, but there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. For a long time. I nodded. And she didn't wait any longer. Months passed. I started doing photography, not only because my father gave me a camera for my birthday, but because I liked to capture moments, capture what mattered, to prove to myself that reality would not disappear, would not betray, would not leave in the dark. I took a picture of Grandma Rose laughing in the kitchen when Lisa tried to help her bake cookies and got sugar mixed up with salt. I took a picture of my father, who threw a jacket over his pajamas to go out early in the morning to get the newspaper, because, according to him, old habits are hard to kill. I captured myself in the mirror, looking into the lens with a new realization that I was no longer a broken girl abandoned at the airport. And then one morning, when I was sitting in a cafe after school and looking at new photos, my phone vibrated. Message. From an unknown number. Tessa. I'm sorry. I stared at the screen, and then, before I could think, I just deleted the message. And now, sitting on my windowsill with a cup of tea, I look at the city that has become my real home, at the narrow streets flooded with evening light, at people hurrying about their business, at the lights in the windows of other people's apartments, and I feel what I always thought I lacked: calmness. It didn't come immediately, it crept towards me slowly, carefully, as if it was afraid that I would push it away, but now it's here, rooted deep inside, and it no longer seems to me that something is about to break, collapse, disappear, leaving me alone in this vast, unpredictable universe. Dad and Lisa's wedding was a real celebration that I will remember for the rest of my life, not because it was a loud and magnificent celebration, but because for the first time in a long time I saw Dad really happy. I saw a smile on his face, in which there was not a trace of sadness or fatigue, and it seemed to me that even the air around them became lighter, filled with warmth and some kind of elusive light. Lisa looked incredibly beautiful in her simple but elegant dress, and when she took my hand before the ceremony and told me that she considered me her family, my breath caught in my throat. I stood next to her, holding a bouquet of delicate blue flowers that matched the color of my dress, and watched as Dad looked at her with the kind of love they write about in books, which I once doubted existed, and realized that maybe life wasn't perfect. Perhaps there are losses and betrayals in it, but there are also moments in it when everything seems right, when the world becomes exactly the way it should be. After the wedding, we returned home, now to a house that I could truly call my own. I took off my shoes, climbed onto the sofa with my feet, and watched with a smile as Lisa and Dad hugged each other and reviewed photos from the wedding, while Grandma Rose hummed to herself as she set the table, as she did every Sunday. I found myself thinking that I wasn't thinking about my mom anymore. I don't think about where she is now, how she's doing, or if she's happy. I don't need her approval anymore. I don't need her recognition. I stopped waiting for her love, because I realized that true love is not the one that needs to be begged. It comes by itself, without conditions, without demands, without pain. New friends have become a part of my life as easily and naturally as the rays of the sun breaking through the curtains in the morning. We walk in the park, discuss movies, laugh until we cry at jokes that no one will remember in a week. But in these moments it seems to me that I am finally living the life I should have lived from the very beginning. I don't feel like a ghost anymore. I don't look back. I don't think about those who left me in the past. I'm moving forward, step by step, knowing that now I have something that I missed so much before.